Welcome, everyone. My name is Alan Smith. This is the Digital Wellness webinar about misinformation. And this is our final webinar of the year. So this closes our first year of doing this. I'm seeing some people in the chat that I recognize and have seen before. So thank you for attending multiple of these, or if this is your first one, welcome. We're very glad to have you here. I'm going to, first of all, introduce some folks who are going to be joining me today and chatting and talking to you in all sorts of different mediums. And the first person I'm going to bring up is Kaveh, who's going to be my co-host today. Kaveh, say hi, say who you are at CR, and tell us where you are in the world.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kaveh Waddell. I'm an investigative journalist at Consumer Reports. I'm coming to you from San Francisco, California. I cover misinformation, among other things, and I'm excited to talk to you. And this is just-in-time cameo from my cat, Sage, who's a vigilant watcher of the neighborhood.
Important. All right, so other folks who, we got a lot of people, so we're not gonna have everyone come say hi, but I'll just do a quick introduction. You should see, if you're in the Q&A, you should be interacting with both Amira and Ryan from CR, both of whom have done a lot of reporting about misinformation themselves in different ways, shapes, and forms. And if you're in the chat, you're gonna either be seeing Kimberly or Thomas Germain, Kimberly Fountain or Thomas Germain, who are the folks who are going to be chatting with you there. So please engage with both of them. And you know, those are the official CR representatives on the call. And then we hope to be hearing from all of you as well. So today we are going to introduce ourselves, which we've already done. We're going to give you all a quick definition of what we mean when we say misinformation, what it is, and why it's such a big deal right now. We're going to go into a few case studies of places where we have seen misinformation out in the wild, so to speak, and try to figure out what, if anything, we can do about those case studies. And then we're going to give you all some tools for thinking about misinformation, battling misinformation, hopefully things that you can work into your own life. And we're going to hopefully have some time for questions, if I can keep myself succinct. And then we'll be out of here by about 4 p.m. Eastern, so in about an hour from now. But before we get into any of those things, a few points of housekeeping. Misinformation right now in this moment, this is something of a hot button issue, right? How we define, how we label, and how we control misinformation right now in this current political moment, in this current social moment, is very important, and it's also probably going to rub people in an emotional way. So unlike, say, password managers, unlike VPNs, unlike broadband, we're still hoping we can have a very open and civil conversation. So please, maybe even more than any of the previous webinars where we've talked about this, please try to come to this conversation with an open mind and be respectful of the other folks on this call. We're all here to learn, and hopefully we can keep it civil in those regards. I also want to note that we are recording this webinar so that we can pass it around to folks who could not be here, but also so that we can send it to you. So just so you know, you will be getting a full recording of everything we talk about today. Don't worry too much about taking furious notes. Do engage in the polls and the chat. There is a Q&A function that you should see now that you can ask questions as we go. And then the last but not least, in terms of housekeeping, there should be an option to turn on closed captioning if you so desire. You should see that in the bottom of your screen near where the poll and the chat icons are. So with that housekeeping out of the way, let's go ahead and dive into the topic at hand. So misinformation. We have worked up a sort of technical definition here. We think it's when someone intentionally is presenting false info or mistakenly repeating untrue information and presenting that information as facts, and that the information can cause active harm. So that is sometimes more useful to define as what it's not. It's not satire. It's not commentary. It's not an opinion. It's something that is being presented as fact, but is misleading and not factual. So Kaveh, you spend all your time thinking about misinformation. Tell me a bit more about that definition, and why do you find that it's a big deal and that you're spending all your time working on it and thinking about it?
Yeah, I just wanted to say up top, some people sort of break apart what we're calling misinformation into two categories: disinformation and misinformation. We're calling all those misinformation here. What Alan just mentioned is sort of both parts. So disinformation might be someone who's maliciously sharing something that they know is not true. They're trying to trick somebody. And then misinformation might include that, but also is, somebody who read something online, thought, oh, that seems true, or whatever. I want other people to see this, and shares it. So all of that kind of comes into our bubble. And that last sort of portion of the definition really matters to us a lot, something that can cause harm. So if you take a false statement and present it as fact, and it's, I stubbed my toe this morning getting out of the shower, that might be false. You're presenting it as fact, but it's not going to cause widespread harm. Something that would is misinformation that would cause put in danger health or democracy, for example. So if you say, I've got this great cure for the coronavirus, you just have to drink bleach, that's false. You're presenting it as fact, and it's definitely going to cause harm if anybody takes you seriously. That could kill you. If you say anything, along the lines of, this election is among the most fraudulent that have occurred, and here's a bunch of examples of what happened that should shake your faith in the legitimacy of the election. That's something that could cause harm to our institution of democracy, and in certain cases, there have been sort of real-world threats to poll workers because of false information about the election and about vote counting. So this matters on a personal level. It's personal health. It matters on a societal level. It's the health of our institutions and democracy. There was a recent Pew survey that really stuck with me. It said that Americans who depend on social media for political news have lower political knowledge than most other groups. So it's also something that sort of can affect your ability to engage with the facts of the political situation and be able to engage in smart conversations with people around you. And Alan, you're talking often about sort of how we're psychologically predisposed for some of this. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, we're gonna jump in later on to talking a lot. I mean, I think misinformation really breaks itself down. There's so many different ways to slice it, but another way to slice misinformation is sort of between the responsibility that we have as individuals to be intelligent consumers of information, and then the responsibility that platforms and different media outlets have in terms of how that information gets to us. So Kaveh was just touching on sort of the propensity that people have, the Pew study that shows that people who are getting all their information from social media have a lower political awareness. I think that's the way that it was phrased. Maybe I have that wrong, but the idea here is that there are a lot of ways that these platforms are taking advantage of our own sort of monkey brains, our own psychological dependencies. And we'll be talking a little bit more about, the propensity for anger or something that has a really strong emotional trigger to push you to react or overreact to information that you haven't then taken time to kind of process and do what would usually be your due diligence before sharing or before putting out into the world. But I just want to say here before we move on to the next big idea is that I want us all to forgive ourselves if we have fallen for misinformation in the past. I have definitely shared things and then had them critiqued, or people have said, "Wait a second, that's not real," and I've had to go back and realize that I got. Someone got to me and they managed to mislead me in a way. And so I think that it's important for you all to remember that this is not something that is just it's not something that you should carry with you if it's happened before. It's something that we want to work on preventing in the future. What are some of the things, Kaveh, that you're seeing when you're looking at misinformation? What do you see people? What is working? What are people trying in the sort of intentional misinformation category? And how is it catching fire, and where is it going?
Yeah, one thing I find makes reporting on or even sort of existing in a sea of misinformation really difficult is that it looks really different in different cases. It can take a ton of different shapes and sizes. There are different formats. You know, it can just be a text post on Facebook, a tweet, a news story that isn't, you know, it's on a low quality news site, and so it doesn't have the right facts. It can be a photo, it can be a video. Um, but even more difficult are sort of the shades of kind of the degrees of manipulation. The easiest ones to point out and to find are things that are just totally invented, completely out of whole cloth. You know, Biden has no teeth. Uh, Trump is hiding, you know, devil horns under his head. Whatever it's just like completely has no basis in fact whatsoever. Um, More often than that, you see things that are sort of spun or they're out of context. So it might be a real photo. It's not a photo that's been photoshopped or anything, but it's taken out of the context that it really exists in. So maybe it's presented as being in one place, but it's really from another. Before this job, I reported for a while from the Middle East, and I was in Lebanon, and next door there was a Syrian civil war going on. People would share photos to make a point about something. You know, either that the war is not as bad as it looks, or it's actually far worse than it looks. And they might share photos that were actually taken, you know, in that place 6 years ago when there was no war, or that were actually taken in Iraq or somewhere else. And so these are real non-manipulated photos, but they're presented in a misleading way. Then there are actual manipulations, your photoshops, your video edits, easy stuff. I mean, Alan, I don't know if you remember, like a year or two ago, there was this video of Nancy Pelosi giving a speech, and it had been slowed down. It was really, I mean, you know, you could do this with easy, cheap software. It was just slowed down to make her sound like she was slurring her speech. And it really took fire because people, you know, if they were primed to believe that this person wasn't fit to lead, then they were sort of ready to hook into that.
Yeah, and that, I mean, that you also see sort of there's a really interesting line there between sort of finding the worst picture that you can of somebody, them on their worst day at their worst moment, or then you know, you hear stories, or there are examples of people say intentionally making a black candidate's skin darker, or sort of like trying to use the whatever dog whistle or moment that they can to overemphasize something that they think is a negative.
Yeah, it kind of all boils down to emotional manipulation in a lot of ways. Everything from clickbait that takes something that might be true but frames it in a way that gets your blood boiling. Statistics that are you know, spun or only show part of the story. They're all sort of designed to get you angry or surprised or upset or excited, and then you're much more likely to share something before you have time to slow down and think critically. And we'll talk in a little bit about some tools that you can use, both sort of mental models and actual tools that you can use to make sure that doesn't happen. Alan, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So we're also talking about this, we're referencing misinformation from years gone by, but we're also talking about this in December of 2020. What has happened this year? What do you think is germane that people should think about? And what has changed in what you've been tracking over misinformation in this calendar year, over this, maybe this political election, but also in places that are not overtly political?
Yeah, well, one huge factor that's new this year is the pandemic. We're at home. We're spending more time than we have in a long time online. And so we're just more likely to be surrounded by online information. And a lot of other people are spending more time online and might be likely to be spreading misinfo. So it's just around us more than ever before. I was, like you said, the election was a big driver of misinformation. The German Marshall Fund just came out a couple weeks ago with this study that showed that engagement with what they call Trojan horse sites, which are sites that look like a reputable source of information, but they're not really. Engagement with these sites was up basically 2 times compared to this time in 2016. So even though we've had sort of 4 years to prime ourselves and to practice and just to be aware that this is something that is around us. um, it's still something that people are spending a lot of time around. And one last thing is that the sources of misinformation sort of shifted a little bit this year, and this has
Yeah.
been happening for years. Um, but in 2016, we talked about troll farms and like teenagers in Macedonia that were like cooking up these crazy fake news sites for money and clicks. Um, and some of that still exists, but a lot of the dangerous information about the election and about people's health um, came straight from authoritative sources, came straight from the White House in many cases. And that's something that a lot of institutions were not really prepared to deal with. I think the news media is still figuring out what to do about that. Social media companies are definitely still figuring out what to do about that. And so that was just kind of a weakness in our preparation as a community for dealing with all of this. Um, and so it really took off in kind of a new way in 2020, and so it's sort of important to think about it in this context and figure out what are we likely to see now, and how can we protect ourselves and others against it.
Yeah, and I mean that multiplying effect is really interesting to me. The idea of like we've always been presage, our brains work in such a way that we tend to seek information that aligns with our worldview, what we think is already true. We tend to find ways of trying to confirm that. And when you're stuck at home and choosing all of your media information along narrower and narrower bands, that gets easier and easier, and that can and will lead to um, misinformation finding more and more fertile places to take root. So I'm going to go, let's see if we can do this correctly, Kimberly. I'm going to skip this, not skip, I'm going to come back to this last question, but I want to know from folks, you should have a poll that's popping up on your screen fairly soon here, asking where do you see misinformation spread the most? When you see something that you think is misinfo, are you seeing it on Facebook, on Twitter? Are you getting emails about stuff that you think is misinformation in some other way? If you're seeing it on some other social media platform, I'd be really curious to know what that one is. And if you could drop that into chat, that would be interesting as well. If you're seeing it mostly on websites, or if you're not sure, I mean, it's coming in all kinds of different places. Yeah, just curious to know, based on what we've talked about so far, where are you seeing it? It's looking like I'll give folks a little more time to respond here, but Kaveh, this probably won't surprise you. We're seeing a lion's share towards Facebook. And don't worry, folks, if this poll didn't pop up for you, I'm seeing in the chat that folks are having a little technical trouble with all this. This is thoroughly unscientific. We're just trying to get a sense from people on this call what they're seeing and where. So don't worry if you didn't see the poll. You can play along at home. You can put something in the chat. But Kaveh, most folks are, or at least the plurality of folks are identifying Facebook here. Does that correspond to your reality?
That doesn't surprise me too much. It's interesting because it's hard to know sort of what the actual volume of misinformation is. There's just so much stuff on all of these products. You're never going to know exactly like what percent of stuff is misinformation, what isn't. But people by and large spend a large amount of time on Twitter and on Facebook rather. And so I'm not surprised that that's kind of a leader there. I saw some people in the chat bringing up YouTube. That's another one where they have been trying to figure out what to do about misinformation for a while, and they've sort of only been doing an okay job. I'll talk later about something, a change that they just made today. And I saw a couple other people talking about TV. These like mainstream sources can also be balled up in this. So it's interesting that Facebook is the polarity, but it also, there's a fair number of answers in every bucket, which tells you it's coming from everywhere.
Yeah, which is it's always tough when the answer is all of the above.
Right.
That's a tricky thing. So I'm going to go back to the thing we've kind of been touching on, but I do want to take one more second on this last question. So we've kind of been mentioning this before, but what about social media and the way that our consumption habits on social media, or it's not really our habits as much as how social media is constructed in this moment in time has allowed for or made us more susceptible to misinformation.
Yeah, there are some things about how social media is set up, and how they try to police uh, misinformation that sort of um, make it a particularly difficult problem. So this summer, I did something about census of different social media companies' misinformation policies, just to figure out what Facebook, what kinds of misinformation Facebook would allow you to post, what kinds it doesn't allow you to post, all the way down from Instagram to Reddit to Pinterest, TikTok, a bunch of other ones. And maybe we have a link that we can share in chat if people want to see. There's kind of an interactive set of graphs that we made up, that I made with some colleagues. And what we found was that there's a lot of variation. Some things that are allowed on one site aren't allowed on another. Or even when things aren't allowed on many sites, products will do different things with them. Some of them might just hide them, make it less likely that you'll see them. Some might take them down entirely. And so from a consumer perspective, it can be hard to know when you're opening up Facebook versus YouTube that day versus scrolling through Instagram. What are the rules? What should you expect to see if you see something off? What can you do? Can you report it? Is this, are you just like supposed to roll your eyes and keep scrolling? So there's a lot of variation in policies, and then a lot of variation in enforcement too, a lot of uneven enforcement. Earlier in the year, I put together the set of 7 ads, Facebook ads that had either outright misinformation or really harmful stuff about coronavirus in them. One of them did say, drink bleach, it'll help cure the coronavirus, which is not true. We submitted them to Facebook to actually put them out onto their ad platform, and Facebook approved them all. We didn't actually publish them, but Facebook greenlit them such that if we had hit the button, off they would have gone to the wide world. And that's a little nervous making. I mean, it was pretty easy for me to sit down and put these together and have them be greenlit to go.
Kaveh, let me just say that Kimberly just dropped the article that Kaveh is talking about in the chat. But don't worry if it's all going by a little bit too fast. Fear not, because we will be sending you a digest email tomorrow with Kaveh's reporting on misinformation, Thomas and Ryan's reporting on misinformation, some other stuff CR has had, and some things that you can do to prevent misinformation in your own life. So check out the links as they go by, but don't worry too much if they go by too quickly. Anything else you want to make sure we hit on sort of how platforms are set up to mislead us before we kind of get into some case studies here?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that these policies are changing all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're changing a little bit late in the game. So just last week, Facebook said it's going to take down misinformation about coronavirus vaccines, which is great. But just yesterday, I think, or possibly the day before, the first person in the world actually got a coronavirus vaccine. So it's pretty late in the game. It's not, I mean, people have been talking about this for a long time. And so it could have been a policy that would have been in place a long time ago. Another one, YouTube just today said it would remove videos disputing that President-elect Joe Biden won the election. Again, a little bit late. They made an argument that there was, some safe harbor deadline that happened today, and that's why they chose today. But it has been weeks since the election, and they're going to leave up everything that's already up. It's just today and forward that they're taking down. So just an illustration of how sort of piecemeal and sort of uneven the rules and the enforcement can be.
I want to I want to reiterate one more time to folks, because I see this kind of happening in the chat and the Q&A in a couple different ways, that we are being inclusive with our definition of misinformation here. So it's both people who are trying to mislead you, trying to get a click or a reaction from you, and then people who are unintentionally misleading you. That is to say, they are having a reaction, they are sharing something, they are passing something on, not necessarily with a malicious intent, but that has a malicious effect. So I want to make sure that we are thinking about both of those things in our umbrella definition of misinformation, because we're going to unpack a few real life examples really quickly here, different things that Kaveh and actually Amira has seen out in the world, and see what we can learn. But please, if you've seen other things that you think are emblematic of this particular issue, or you have ways of dealing with this stuff, we'd love to know about it in the chat. Case study number one. You might have seen this photograph at some point in the last couple of months. This photograph purports to show a bunch, well, what it does show is a bunch of ballots in a dumpster. But it purports to show a bunch of different things. So, Kaveh, what is this photo and how was this photo presented to the world?
Mhm. Yeah, I like this one because it's not been manipulated. This is a real photo. It was taken where it was claimed to be taken, and it was taken when it was claimed to be taken. But the way that the contents were described were what was misleading. So this is a pretty recent photo. It's of a dumpster in Petaluma, California, which is about an hour north of where I live in San Francisco. And the argument was, hey, look at this dumpster. County officials are just chucking your ballots. You worked so hard to vote your ballots and they're just putting them in a dumpster. Evidence of fraud. Everything is bad. And many people were sort of primed to buy into this narrative. A lot of people were sort of looking for, they were sure that something like this was going to happen, if not in some places, then everywhere. And when you see something, you're like, there it is. Okay, retweet, off it goes. This is exactly what I expected. And so this thing went mini viral, and we'll show you in just a moment what that looks like. Sonoma County, where Petaluma is located, pretty quickly came in and said, whoa, that's not true. From official source, they're saying these aren't actually ballots. They're ballot envelopes where you're supposed to put in your ballot after you voted it, and then you mailed it in. And they're from 2018. They're from the midterms. They were no longer needed. This is California, so they were recycled. And so this is not like evidence of nefarious ballot harvest or ballot dumping. This was just, these were outdated ballot envelopes. Let's go to the next slide. By the time this was corrected, this thing had already gone mega viral. What we're looking at here across the bottom, you see sort of 4-hour chunks. So 4, 8, 12, 16 hours from the original tweet. And then on the y-axis going up, you can see it sort of hockey sticks up this line. These are the number of retweets. And just in these less than 24 hours, it gets more than 25,000 retweets. And it kept going from there. And the fact check didn't go nearly as far. And so once it's unleashed, sort of hard to put it back in the box.
Yeah, someone just said, and Paul just said in the chat, a lie spreads faster than the truth. That's absolutely accurate. I also want to, I just saw something from G Andrews, who was making the point that how information is making you feel, you should pay attention to that. You should be checking in with yourself as you were looking at any kind of media, any kind of information. And if it is in fact drawing out a strong emotional reaction from you, you should take a moment to ask why and to ask what that might mean. And this is a really interesting graph as well, because it sort of shows the ways in which one person or one megaphone can really change the setting. So this really large purple circle is a retweet from Donald Trump Jr. And that is on or around hour 16, what was sort of a small, it was still growing. You can still see this hockey stick. It was still going up, but that really what moved this particular story from into the mainstream, into everybody could see it. Everyone was looking at it. So case study number 2, we're going to try to narrow it way back in and talk a little bit kind of about the point that G was just making about an emotional or a personal reaction. So I'm going to ask Amira to come off. Amira, if you've been on these calls before, you know her. She's been a host many times. She works with us all at Consumer Reports, but also she is a researcher around misinformation in her own right. And but Amira, you had some kind of in-person, family-sized, family scale interactions with misinformation. You want to tell us about that?
Sure, Alan. Well, I think in general, like anyone who is online often, as many of us are seeing misinformation in your everyday. So whether it's on social media sites or in conversation, you're hearing people talk about things, and you're like, "Is that actually true?" And I have these moments quite often with individuals in my life where I'm getting really accustomed to asking them, "What's your source?" Like, should we check like I'm actively bringing us into the conversation when I talk to people to make sure that I'm not just going to believe everything I hear because it is so outlandish and crazy that I'm kind of like, how is that possible? I do actively try to take steps when I do it. But I am hearing it quite often. I'm hearing it with friends, with family member, and they're popping up in places that are actually quite difficult to tackle. And so what Alan is referencing is a story I told him about WhatsApp. And so I know we didn't include WhatsApp on the first poll, and some of you have mentioned it in the Q&A function. But the rise of misinformation in WhatsApp is not to be undermined because it is so large. And WhatsApp, like some of you have already identified, can be really, really difficult to cut through the noise because you almost feel like it's coming from a trusted source, like it's a friend or a family member. And in my case, I've been in quite a few groups where individuals will constantly share information of the lights are going out at 10 p.m. tonight. Make sure you have your candles ready. We're all going to lose electricity, or you need to make sure you forward this email message before X happens. And I'm seeing so much of this. And sometimes they're really obvious, like those ones I'm mentioning. And sometimes they're really subtle. And that really subtle one has been really hard for us to tackle and has been super apparent, especially with the pandemic. I find that people are sharing information articles in the pandemic where it's talking about people being affected, and I almost believe it's true and then have to pull myself back. Um, so I have had an instance with one of my family chats. So it's people I know and love. And someone in my family chat was sharing a lot of articles related to the COVID-19 results and just general information. And I've always wondered about the articles this person was sharing, but I had to have a full on moment where I was like, okay, I think this person has a source that is incorrect where they are sharing all this information, and we need to talk about it. So I had a conversation with them on the side to be like, hey, I need you to start fact checking your articles because they are scary and they're quite inaccurate when I research them. And you're affecting the circle effect where you scare someone else and then they scare someone else. So I talked to them about where they were getting these articles and information on, and it turns out they were in other WhatsApp groups that they were getting these informations from, and a lot of them from back home, which for me is East Africa. So my community there, who have created these groups and are sharing posts, and they just kind of get cycled out continuously. Like avocados are great for when you're having a baby, or even more scarier of um, the vaccine will totally eradicate the Western world or the non-Western world. And some have little effect and some have bigger effect. But for me, I really wanted to share that example and story as I was talking to Alan about it. But also, you know, these are hard conversations, and they often take a little bit of courage to have, even with your family members who are spreading this fake news.
So,
And I can't
Amira,
say that.
can I
Oh yeah,
ask? Yeah, yeah. Can I just ask
totally.
how did it go when you had this tough conversation? Because someone a couple people in the comments are saying, like I've tried this and someone's just said fake news
Yeah.
and shut me down, or the conversation is over immediately. And did you find that, or did you find some receptivity and
So I found some receptivity for sure, but it didn't mean the person stopped. And that's where that's where the problem has been digressing over time. And so what I found was, slowly itching in on this person, and then talking about, okay, well, if you think this is true, let's both get our sources and have a conversation about this. But I found that it's only really helpful when you approach someone in not an attack mode, but in a conversational mode where you can talk about the sources and why things might be true or not. And ever since then, we've been having more conversations where they'll see something online and they'll call me and they'll say, hey, do you think this is true? So now I've become their fact checker, their physical fact checker, which I then go take that information and do. So, and I'll say that even with my story, like it's not like you will automatically change a person's mind, but I think it's starting to have people question what they're looking at is like really the effect you can have, and starting to like share more resources with them. I know it's really easy to dismiss our family members who are doing that and be like, I'm just going to exit the group. But they're still watching and reading it. And I would really talk about what does fact checking look like for your family, especially in a place like WhatsApp, where I think most families do convene. And how do you make that like a discussion topic with your family or others, like at the dinner table or in groups, and talk about those feelings?
Yeah,
Amir,
wonderful.
what I love about that story, Amir, is that you kind of end up on the same team as your family member who is having a history of sharing these things. And often, and I'm seeing some really interesting comments in the chat about how where you get your news is really balled up in your identity and your political identity, your social identity, and that can really turn into an us versus them sort of a battle. And so if you're bringing in a certain source of information that feels important and trustworthy to you, and someone else battles with, their source, then it can be hard to kind of disentangle that. But what you were able to do is sort of hop over that fence entirely, and just create a personal connection with this person. And now they can come to you for help rather than like, maybe feeling belittled. I've had issues where I've accidentally come out a little too excitedly against a family member who is sharing bad information. Then it becomes, it becomes that way. It's us versus them again. But if you can be on the same team, if it's friendly, if it's like, hey, Kawhi, I saw this thing. Do you think this is true? Like, I know you think about this a lot. Like, do you think this is true? That's just a whole lot better. That's a good
I
outcome.
love what Robert just put in chat too. What's worked for him is to say, that's really impressive, but I'm having trouble confirming it from the sources that I usually trust. So can you what's your source and what's the best source? And let's compare notes here. I like that. I like all these things that are getting us on the same team. And I also don't want to belittle the people who are frustrated and having difficulty with this because it is not easy. We're going to get into a bunch of individual tactics in just a second, but we want to flag a few things for you all going forward. Things to be on the lookout for that we think are coming out soon now in this moment. So we're worried about misinformation around any and all COVID-19 vaccine rollouts. As Kaveh was saying, that has started. That's here, that's happening now. And we're starting to see, we have been seeing misinformation along those lines. And also, as Kaveh said before, Facebook has taken a stand, possibly too little, possibly too late, but they are now removing misinformation specifically about COVID. We think that there's going to be a peak of misinformation in Georgia and around the runoff. We think that there's going to be a peak of misinformation around the inauguration day and the legitimacy of Biden's presidency. And then always remember to doubt everything you see on the internet on April 1st. Those are the things that we've flagged. But remember, regardless of the individual flags, the individual hotspots, never let your guard down when reading anything online. You should check the sources that I will send around later, because after all, I'm just somebody on the internet. But I am very well sourced, so I'll be sending all that stuff around. But remember that anyone can fall for misinformation. It doesn't make you a bad person, but if it has happened to you, that can be a learning moment and a way for you to teach yourself as you go. So think before you post something, before you share it, or even as you're just engaging with it, even if you're not someone who shares. Think about what the source is. Think about whether or not this source is trying to appeal to a powerful emotion in you. Is it trying to is it trying to make you feel guilty or angry? Are you seeing red? Do you feel the mists, the red mist settling over you? If so, take a pause and take a closer look and do some of the research techniques that Kaveh is going to go into on the next slide. You can be you can be the Smokey the Bear of misinformation. You can be the person who inoculates both your friends and your family against misinformation. But as we've talked about a lot here, not by yelling. Yelling doesn't work, and shaming doesn't usually work, and sort of anything that sort of ups the emotional stakes of the moment, not particularly effective. So we're trying to do all those things. Kaveh, where do you go? How do you do this? What are some tactics and techniques?
Yeah, I think the number one best thing you can do is develop your own personal in-brain fire alarm. When you're seeing red, like you said, Alan, you want to have this like immediate reflex that says, wait, hang on, what's going on and why? So the moment you're itching to share a reply to a post, you take a breather. Thomas, I saw you you posted a link in the chat earlier to a set of steps that's really simple. It's just a 4-step method for how to engage with a piece of information that you think might be worth checking out. It's called SIFT, and I'll have Thomas drop that in again, and that's really useful to look at. But that first S, stop, really important. What I hear often is if it's important now, it's going to be important in 5 minutes. It's going to be important in 10 minutes.
I feel like my parents said that to me when I was like 6. Is that still true? Huh?
It's lasting and very good advice. And in those like 5 or 10 minutes, you can do something really simple. You just open a new tab, open a new browser window, and search for the fact. Whatever it is, distill the thing that you're sort of squinting at in the tweet, the Facebook post, the WhatsApp message, whatever it is. Google it. If a bunch of reputable news sources are reporting the same thing, it's likely true, and you can read through and understand a little bit more of the context. If all you get is a bunch of Snopes and Politifact fact checks, and that's just to name 2 of the fact checking sources that we trust here at CR. If it's a bunch of Snopes and Politifact pages saying false or partly untrue or out of context, figure out what's wrong and then either ignore it and scroll on, or if it's somebody that you personally know, you can do what Amira did and engage with them, and maybe engage with them offline or send them a text or something, so that it's not you're not broadcasting to their friends and family that they did something stupid that makes people upset and defensive. You can just shoot them a text and say, hey, do you know that might not be true? So in addition to these independent fact-checking organizations, Snopes, Politifact, just get in the habit of checking with authoritative journalistic institutions like good newspapers, your local newspapers, some of the really big, well-known ones, the New York Times, Washington Post, Consumer Reports. Essentially what you're looking for is an organization with a long history of reporting the facts, being careful, correcting mistakes when they happen, because they do happen. This is not to say that these mainstream sources are infallible, but when they make a mistake, they correct it transparently, so that that you can trust that they are taking responsibility for what goes on. These are organizations with editorial standards. They are going out and reporting and verifying news carefully, and they're there so that you don't have to be the single individual person going out and checking everything. Organizations like CR are here to sort of help you separate fact from fiction. Now I want to take a moment to sort of do a demo of one of the tools that's really useful for checking images. Let me just bring this up really quick. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Now, Alan, let me know when this is showing for you.
I gotcha, loud and clear.
Awesome.
Or I guess not loud, just clear.
So here are our friends, Marshall Ali, Ryan Gosling. Here's a tweet that says, "Unbelievable! Just leaked photos from a secret party in LA with no masks." Ryan Gosling, Marshall Ali, and the Hollywood elite think they don't have to follow the same rules as everybody else. Now you might come across a tweet like this and think several different things. You might think, "Oh, hey, that's surprising. I really respect these guys. I'm going to tweet something about this and say, what's going on? Like this isn't right. I'm not okay with this." Or you might come in and say, "Yeah, totally. Like these rich Hollywood elite, they don't care about us. They think they can do whatever they want. I'm like totally pissed off by this, and I'm going to tweet angry stuff." Or you can think, okay, well, what's going on in this photo? Here's two people hanging out unmasked, not okay at this point in time. That's sort of the button that this is trying to press. This is why you might be seeing red in one direction or another. The real question is, okay, what event is this photo from? When was this taken? Was this taken in the height of LA's lockdown, where it would be really messed up for them to be doing this? Or is this from another time? So here's a really easy trick that you can do. This is like a total internet superpower that not enough people do. I like to do it as much as possible. It's called a reverse image search. So where you might usually put in, Ryan Gosling in Google Images to bring up photos of him. I don't know why you might do that, but you could. That's going from a text search to photos. This does the opposite. You search using a photo, and then you find either text or other photos. And you can find the context that a photo sort of appeared originally. So we'll do it right now. I'm going to right click on this photo, and I'm going to say copy image address. Okay, so I'm not actually copying the image, I'm copying the image address. So I've got that now on clipboard, and I'm opening a new tab. And there's two places I can go. I like to go to a place called TinEye. This is a really well-known site for doing reverse image searches. So it's tineye.com, like the eye of a robot or something, tineye.com. Reverse image search, nice simple website. And I go in here and I paste, so right-click paste or Control V or Apple V, the image address that I just copied on the previous slide. And then I hit search, and it thinks for a moment. Okay, so here's my thing. Searched 44 billion photos, and then I'm coming down here. First found November 26, 2018. Huh, that's interesting. So this said, just leaked photos from a secret party in LA with no masks. This is telling me it was first found in 2018. So let me click on this and find out what's going on. And when it comes up, I see that I'm on Getty Images, which is a very well-known site for selling journalistic photos. In fact, I can buy the photo if I wanted to make this my computer desktop for whatever reason, $500, no problem. And it says up here, BAFTA Tea Party in LA at Beverly Hills on January 7th, 2017. So this is the original context for the photo. So somebody lifted this photo. Okay, so full disclosure, I tweeted this as a fake account, I made it. So I lifted this photo from Getty Images, tweeted it with a completely false sort of context here, and changed the way that you might see and make sense of the photo. And I'll do really quick another demo here. If you go to Google,
Kaveh, I think we
move on?
might not have time for that other demo, but I promise that I will send the website that he was about to tell us about around on everything, because we have one more major point that I want you to talk about, platform responsibility, and I still want to get to some questions, and we have about 10 minutes left. So, but don't worry, the other search option will come around to you all in the not too distant future. And let me get this back up, because I would like
the other search option was Google, so it's pretty low stakes, Google Images, but we'll send that around.
So, Kaveh, tell me about what is happening right in this moment about you mentioned that Facebook has recently changed their policies. You mentioned policies are changing quickly and are all over the place. Tell me what social media platforms should be doing.
Yeah, so this sort of all boils down to a shared responsibility between social media companies and us as consumers of information. So we have certain tools that we can use, the SIFT method, that brain fire alarm for wait, hang on, let's look things up, reverse image searches, that you can do with individual pieces of information that come up. But social media companies are the ones that are delivering these and allowing people to share them. And allowing things that are false to go crazy viral and for everybody to see them and potentially cause harm. So what can they do? They have a lot of power in the algorithms that define the order in which you see the stuff that you see when you go to the product. You open up Instagram, what photo comes up first? You open up Facebook, Twitter, what tweets do you see first? They're no longer in chronological order. Twitter is pumping up a tweet to the top for you. It's not everybody is necessarily seeing the same one. Alan is seeing this tweet first or this post first. And the question to ask yourself is, why is that there? When you see something on top of your feed, ask yourself why it's there. Is this the most important and truest thing on Facebook today? Or is this the thing that the algorithm predicts is most likely to get you to interact with it? Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Pinterest, all of these sites want you to spend as much time as possible on their websites so that they can make more money. They sell ads, they make more money the more time you spend there. And there's a really instructive story from just a couple of weeks ago. The New York Times reported that right before the election, Facebook tested a tweak to their algorithm where they basically increased the weight of solid, well-reported news. So your New York Times and your Washington Post and your Consumer Reports were boosted higher in people's feeds when they open Facebook.com, and the other stuff that often goes up on top was lowered. So they have control of these knobs, and what they found was, well, maybe this was good for the world. Maybe people were seeing more hard, well-reported news, but it was bad for Facebook because people were spending less time. They saw that in response to this, people were spending less time on Facebook. They closed out earlier, they came back less. And so this is a trade-off that they're making all the time between, delivering the most addicting or the most engaging content and maybe the most, good for the world content. And our job here at CR, among other things, is to pressure them to do the best thing for consumers. So that's what we're trying to do.
So there's a question at the top of the Q&A right now that I think is sort of about this question, and we'll use that as a great way to segue into questions that our question and answer portion here at the end. Teresa asks, can you talk about any measure that might be on the horizon to combat misinformation? So she says, for example, fact-checking, removing or labeling false info, and legal action against purveyors of misinformation. So you've talked a little bit about the algorithmic tweaks that could happen. Are there other sort of like new tools that you'd be excited about? And have you heard anything about legal action against intentional misinformation? And what would the proof point of that be? How could that work?
That's a great question. On the tools, one thing that I've already started to see more of, and that I expect to see even more of, is what the companies like to call adding friction. So this is basically, when they first made these platforms, it was optimized. It was built so that it would be as easy as possible to get into the site, start consuming information, and then sharing things as much as possible. That's what was the priority. Now, a couple of companies, including Twitter, are stepping back and saying, okay, maybe we should slow people down at certain important points, certain important decision points. And this goes back to the S of the SIFT. It's just stopping and slowing people down. So one example is, you might have seen on Twitter, if you see a tweet and you hit retweet on the spot without opening it and without going into the story that's linked, Twitter might pop up a little message and say, hey, do you want to read the story before you retweet it? You can click through it right here. You can read through it and then come back and retweet it. And you can still say no. I mean, you can say, no, I want to retweet on the spot. But that's kind of a new layer that might make you stop and think and be like, okay, well, maybe I should just like skim through this and make sure it says what I think it says, or it says what this person who's tweeting it says, because that's essentially the framing that you're boosting. And so there are several ways that you can add friction in the process. And some early research sort of suggests that's useful. I don't think we know for sure. I mean, it's certainly not a silver bullet, but I think that's a useful thing that I'd personally like to see more of. On the legal action side, that's a tough question. One thing to watch is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Am I saying that right? Somebody correct me if I'm not. That is essentially part of a law that allows, that gives social media companies a lot of latitude to have a lot of information go up that may or may not be true. And it was kind of like one of the foundations that the modern internet was built on. Now there's a lot of debate on, should we change parts of it? Should we take it away completely? It's a really tough debate, because if it were actually taken away completely, like a lot of the legal protections that allow these big internet companies to exist would change, and probably their business models would have to change as well. You could argue that's a good thing, but that's something worth looking into if you're interested in what the legal landscape could look like around misinformation.
So we are close to time. I want to see if I can get a couple of super fast recommendations or questions in. Some people are suggesting that folks should go watch The Social Dilemma on Netflix. We actually prefer Coded Bias, which you should be able to see at your PBS station coming soon. So peep the documentary Coded Bias if you're interested in questions about algorithms and misinformation. It's a great one. And let's see, Kaveh, how in 60 seconds, solve the biggest question of our time. How does one combat confirmation bias? How do you get people to not look for things that they want to see?
Well, if I were able to solve that, I think I'd have a Nobel Prize or two.
Sure.
That's a hard question. I think it's just practice. I think it's just habits. If you sort of build in this mechanism, you see something, you question it, you should build it in for not just something that you see and disagree with, but also something that you see and agree with. You get used to seeing something and you're like, wow, that makes me really happy. Or like, man, this is going to be an awesome link to send my family member who I was sparring with the other week on the phone, because it's going to totally prove them wrong. That's also a moment, maybe even more important, a moment to slow down, check the source, check to see if it's being reported elsewhere. I think that's like the number one way you can sort of inoculate yourself against this.
We've mentioned SIFT a couple times in the chat, I believe. The first part of that acronym is STOP. What's the rest of that acronym?
Ooh, I believe it's, I might have to bring it up as we're going. I believe it's investigate. And then now I'm stalling so that the rest comes up, and it's here. It is stop, investigate the source, find better coverage, and trace claims. Stop, investigate source, find better coverage, trace claims. And again, in the link that we've put in the chat, we might put in again, you can see a whole lot of information about the best way to do each of those steps.
And then the last question that I think we're going to have time for, and thank you all for these wonderful questions, and I deeply apologize if we haven't gotten to all of them. How and where, assuming that Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, have managed to get some system for checking and taking down fake news, misinformation, what have you, how do they get their proof that something is fake or false? Or what training? I'm going to read the question correctly. What training to do this work is done? How do you, is it real people? How does this happen?
It is, for the most part, real people. Facebook has a list of organizations that it works with all around the world. For different languages, there's a different list of organizations. These are fact-checking organizations that are really high quality organizations, and they get sent, essentially they get sent links that seem to be questionable. They do a whole lot of thorough research, figure out if it's real or not, and that their answer gets fed back into Facebook. So if they fact check and it's real, great, everybody's happy, it keeps circulating. And if they fact check and it's partly true or not true at all, then Facebook might label it, or in certain cases, like if it's actually going to be harmful to people, like a coronavirus related thing, they might take it down altogether. So it's a combination of algorithmic, which can have some problems, and people driven, which is generally great because they're very smart, but there aren't enough people to fact check everything that's going up on Facebook. So that's why we think that a lot of things are going to slip through the cracks.
So if nothing else, when you are considering posting a piece of information that you're not totally sure about, think about the poor person slaving away in those data mines, going through the incredible waves of stuff that must be hitting these platforms at any given moment, and have a thought for those folks before you post something out in the world. Okay, we are at time. Thank you all for bearing with us as we got a couple of those more questions in. Really wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Kaveh. As I said before, there's going to be follow-up email with links and recordings of this workshop, so you can go through everything at your own pace. We'd love for you to respond to that email and give us suggestions for topics for future workshops or any other question that happens to be bubbling up in your mind. community@cr.consumer.org is the email address that we've been contacting you from, and it's generally a great way to get in touch with us. Thank you all so very much for coming. Thank you for the time. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Amira. And thank you, Kimberly, for helping proctor us through that wonderful conversation. And great job, everyone, keeping a potentially fraught conversation civil. And we really appreciate your time. And see you in 2021.